Excellent. So we're going to do another co-founder check-in, which is an activity that you can use at the beginning of a co-founder conversation. I'm going to share my screen here and show this one. It's called Patterns and Failure Modes. And the prompt for this check-in is, what is a pattern or failure mode of yours? What's a recent example of this showing up at work or outside of work? And a few fold. So one, as with all check-ins, one person should be leading this process and watching the clock. Two, the goal of this is around vulnerability and self-awareness. So knowing about yourself, here's a pattern I can sometimes fall into as a leader and co-founder. And three, the Enneagram is one of many different personality tools that can help you, when you read about yourself, kind of identify these patterns more clearly and speak to them with more clarity, which is useful in your co-founder relationship. Four, and one last note on this, is that our strengths are also oftentimes our weaknesses. And so you might be able to find these patterns or failure modes by thinking about, oh yeah, here's an area that I'm really strong in, and here's some of the challenges that arise from that. Because of that, here are patterns that I can fall into as a leader interpersonally that have challenges to them. And just to clarify, a failure mode is really, it's a type of pattern that you can get stuck in that has negative impacts on your team or your company. So with all that in mind, we'll demo this now. Noah, keeping to about 2 to 3 minutes, I just want to do a check-in with you. I'm curious, what is a pattern that you sometimes fall into, maybe a failure mode, and what's a recent example of that at work?
Yeah. So this is a pattern and a failure mode that I fall into a lot. So it happens really often. I drive myself really hard, and I think some of the times it's probably an unhealthy amount. And by nature, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed or fearful or scared of something, or we're not performing as well as a company, I will then react in that same way and drive the team members around me in the same way. So I see that as a failure mode because I don't think that the best version of me is driving other team members hard and being it's a bit aggressive, and it's a bit, it's judging. It's like, that's not enough. That's not enough. Instead of trusting that they have their own system in their own way. And instead of saying like, hey, how can I be there to support you? So one specific example is our head of sales, who's done a fantastic job motivating the team, generating sales, getting big name clients excited about the product, coordinating with the engineering team. He's done a lot well. I, just earlier this week was writing him really hard about his projections, because often his projections when we get to the end of the quarter are off. And I'm feeling fearful about what it's going to look like in our next quarterly statement, because the quarterly statement both shows both shows the projections and our actuals compared to what we put into the last quarterly update, and it's all publicly available and so on and so forth. So it's looking like the projections for this quarter are not going to be met. And I came at him pretty aggressively, just saying like, this isn't good enough. And like, why does this keep happening? And that's that judgmental side that comes out. That's that hard driving that I don't think is helpful.
I like the nuance that you offered. So that there's this, you can be hard charging and sometimes aggressive, and it's not always having the results you want in different scenarios. But the nuance I heard was that under stress, it tends to, if there's a goal, a quarterly check-in, so that's a time when you and I can be more aware of that possibly spinning up.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying you and I. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else I can do to support you if I notice that happening?
If you've used any tactics that have been helpful in encouraging team members, especially our head of sales, I would love to glean and learn from you about it.
That'd be fun. Yeah, I'll think about that, and we'll continue that soon. Perfect.
Thank you.
So we just went through a check-in you can use in your co-founder sync called Patterns or Failure Modes. The prompt, as a reminder, is, what is a pattern or failure mode of yours? Was a recent example of this showing up at work or outside? Some quick reminders and tips. One, it's a relatively challenging check-in. It requires self-awareness of one's patterns and a capacity to find an example of it and sort of be vulnerable and talking about, oh yeah, I did this thing again. So just note that this is a little more advanced. Two, you can use a personality tool like the Enneagram, like Myers-Briggs, something else that maybe you are actively using to help you each identify specific patterns that you return to when using this check-in, finding new examples. Three, our strengths are also our weaknesses. So, you don't need to feel like you're being self-sabotaging when you talk about a failure. This is probably, oh, I'm very fast moving and sometimes I jump into things too quickly. And so the failure mode there is jumping in too quickly. It's also that awareness of strengths and weaknesses is also a great way to discover patterns for you and your co-founder. Lastly, and just finally, this is about vulnerability. It's about this consistent process of talking about things that we're not good at with your co-founder, making that honesty and vulnerability a practice because it expands trust when you're being honest. You're not being defensive about patterns, weaknesses, and failure modes.